145,000 asylum applications in just 1 year, over 500,000 people directly involved in the immigration system, and 80 to 90 million euros every day being spent by France on housing, healthcare, and migration-related support. If you think these are just numbers on paper, stay until the end of the video, because these very numbers are changing France day by day. Right now, senior officials confirm the French government is preparing to activate a state of emergency on migration. This means tightening borders, restricting the asylum system, and partially suspending immigration procedures. While over 3 million French citizens are still waiting for social housing, some for 5 to 7 years, refugee reception centers in Paris, Calais, and Marseille have long been at full capacity. And here's the number that reversed public opinion. 58% of French people now say the country should not accept any more refugees. So what pushed France, the symbol of European human rights, to this point? And what will happen if France truly closes its doors? Before these numbers appeared, France was a completely different story. France was once seen as a symbol of human rights and refugee acceptance, a nation that placed immigration and protection of the vulnerable at the center of its republican identity. After World War II, when the country needed rebuilding, France opened its doors to immigrant workers. From North Africa, the Middle East, Africa, to Southeast Asia, people came to work in factories, construction sites, and farms. Immigration then was not seen as a burden. It was viewed as an economic resource, as a necessary workforce for national recovery. For many years, France's immigration system operated on a core belief: society was strong enough to integrate, and the state was capable enough to control. France pursued a model of mandatory integration. Immigrants were required to learn French, comply with the law, and participate in common social life. No separate communities, no parallel systems. For a long time, this model functioned relatively stably. And for many French people, this created a sense of certainty, that no matter how the world changed, France's system was still functioning. But it was from this very confidence that France entered a phase unprepared for overwhelming pressure. The crisis did not emerge because France changed its values. It emerged when the scale of immigration far exceeded the system's operational capacity. Within 1 year, France received over 145,000 new asylum applications. This is an increase that the current processing apparatus cannot handle. But asylum applications are just the tip of the iceberg. At the same time, France also had to receive secondary migrants from other European countries, people under temporary protection, visa overstayers, and undocumented immigrants. When all these groups are added together, the total number of people entering, exiting, or stuck in France's immigration system exceeded 500,000 people in just 1 year. This is the point where the system began to lose rhythm. Refugee reception centers quickly became overloaded. Many facilities operated at 120% to 150% capacity. Application processing times extended many times longer than before. Backlogs increased rapidly. Asylum seekers had to remain in temporary facilities longer than expected, and with each passing day, costs continued to rise. According to internal estimates, the French state currently spends approximately 80 to 90 million euros per day on direct costs related to immigration and asylum, emergency housing, healthcare services, security, and social support. Calculated annually, this figure exceeds 30 billion euros. The problem is not just about money. The problem lies in operational capacity. Local authorities were forced to use sports halls, empty schools, and public buildings as temporary shelters for refugees. These solutions were designed for short-term handling, but when pressure persisted, they became permanent conditions. And that is the clearest sign of exceeding control capacity. When numbers increase faster than processing capacity, when costs rise faster than budgets, when temporary solutions become long-term, then the system can no longer adjust. It begins to overflow pressure into society. The crisis only truly exploded when immigration directly touched people's daily lives. And in France, that point of collision was called housing. Before talking about refugees, France was already in a prolonged housing crisis. Over 3 million people are waiting for social housing. In major cities, typical waiting times are 5 to 7 years. Many families must live temporarily, in cramped conditions, or far from their workplaces. Rental prices rise faster than income. Young people cannot move out on their own. Middle-class workers are gradually pushed out of urban areas. The housing system was already stretched to its limit, and then new pressure appeared. When refugee reception centers became overloaded, authorities were forced to move refugees out of the temporary shelter system and place them in residential living spaces. From a policy perspective, this was a necessary solution. From a social perspective, this was the breaking point. People don't read reports, they see who gets housing first, and in many cases, they feel they come second in their own country. In reality, asylum seekers only account for a small percentage of total social housing. People don't debate percentages, they debate waiting times. About fairness. About a very simple question: why do I have to wait for years while newcomers get housing? From that moment, immigration was no longer an abstract issue. It became a story about apartments, neighborhoods, schools, parking lots, and when issues touch living spaces, society reacts faster than any debate. Frustration spreads, trust declines, and the feeling of being left behind becomes increasingly clear. Not because all immigrants cause the housing crisis, but because the system lacks the capacity to allocate under overload conditions. Housing became the psychological flashpoint. From there, the immigration story moved to a new phase, no longer about whether or not to accept, but about who is paying the price. And in that question, many French people believe they are the ones bearing the loss. An important thing to understand: France is not alone in this crisis. Germany, the country that once accepted over 1 million refugees in 2015, is now facing a strong wave of opposition from public opinion. Sweden, the symbol of open policy, has tightened immigration laws most severely in 30 years. Italy faces crisis as tens of thousands of people cross the Mediterranean from North Africa. The Netherlands, Austria, Denmark, all are adjusting policies toward restriction. Let's be clear about costs. 80 to 90 million euros per day is not just an accounting figure. It equals the healthcare budget of 15 large hospitals or funding for 200,000 university scholarships per year. Meanwhile, France's public healthcare system is short, 10,000 nurses, public schools lack teachers, infrastructure is deteriorating. People see this and ask, why isn't their tax money being used to repair schools, but instead goes into a system they feel has lost control? This is not a debate about morality. This is a debate about allocating scarce resources under strained conditions. Data from recent polls show a worrying shift. 58% of French people say no to accepting more refugees. But that's just the surface. When asked deeper, 72% believe the immigration system is completely out of control. 65% think the government prioritizes immigrants over citizens. 81% worry about the ability for cultural integration in the future. These numbers don't stem from hatred, they stem from anxiety. Anxiety about the future, about identity, about the ability to maintain the quality of life that previous generations built. When a democratic society reaches the point where the majority feels out of control, extremist parties will grow. Not because they have better solutions, but because they are the only choice talking about the problem people are living with every day. By this point, one thing has become very clear. What's happening in France is not a temporary political reaction, nor a familiar ideological debate. It is the result of a series of overlapping pressures, from an immigration system exceeding capacity to a prolonged housing crisis, and finally to direct collision with people's lives. When these problems exist separately, society can still endure, but when they meet at the same point, everything begins to change very rapidly. In France, that meeting point is living space. It's apartments, it's neighborhoods. It's where people perceive injustice with their own eyes, without needing reports or statistics. And from that moment, immigration is no longer a story about compassion or moral obligation. It becomes a story about who is protected and who feels left behind. This is when societies typically move to a more dangerous phase, not because people become callous, but because they begin to lose faith in the system's ability to control. And when trust collapses, choices once considered extreme begin to look like the only option remaining. The important thing is, France is not an isolated case. What's happening in France is reflecting similar tensions in many other countries, from Western Europe, Northern Europe, to the entire European continent. The only difference is, France was once seen as a symbol of the open and human rights model. And precisely because of this, the change in France carries meaning far beyond national borders. It poses a big question to the world. If even France reaches its limit, where does that limit truly lie? If you're watching from outside France, ask yourself, are these pressures appearing in your country? If you think this is just a European story, think again. Because the factors leading to this crisis, immigration, housing, cost of living, trust in the state, are appearing in many other societies around the world. In your opinion, what happens next when a democratic society feels it can no longer control its own rhythm of life? Tighten to protect itself? Or continue opening and accept the risks? Leave your opinion in the comments, especially if you're living outside France. And if you want to follow the next part of this story where we analyze why public opinion reversed, how political forces exploit the crisis, and what awaits Europe ahead, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because what's happening in France may very well be just an early sign of a larger wave. And the real question is no longer, what will France do next? But rather, how will the world react when many countries reach their limits at the same time?